VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker, and we are well underway with training camp. It began last Sunday with rookies showing up, and business really started to heat up in the middle of the week. And so I want to go through, there are a lot of roster bubble players depending on your estimation, but I think there are 5 primary key ones that I want to talk through today with the group. And I'm just gonna launch into those. We're about 15 days away from the preseason, so these roster bubble guys will take more shape. But I'm gonna start like I usually do at the bottom of my list, and when we get to number 1, that will be what I consider the chief roster bubble player, and you probably already know who that is. All right, so at number 5 for me is outside linebacker Pat Jones or Patrick Jones, whichever name you prefer. The reason that he is a roster bubble guy is kind of threefold. Foremost, he wasn't drafted by this brand of leadership. He was selected in 2021. What was he, a third rounder in that sweet and sour draft that fetched Christian Darrisaw, but also Kellen Mond and Wyatt Davis and Chaz Surratt. But right now, Patrick Jones, I don't think that this front office has a whole lot of allegiance to him. Another part of it is if you pull up any pass rushing, like pressure efficiency stat, like, the analytics, the numbers stuff, Patrick Jones is always near the bottom. And then on top of those two factors, the not drafted by Kwesi, last year his pressure numbers were down in the toilet. There's also the matter of this is suddenly a deep roster position. You already have the locks in Jonathan Grenard, Dallas Turner, Andrew Van Ginkel. They're for sure making the roster. But then you start to get into dicey territory with Jihad Ward, who's brand new. Would they really cut him after just signing him? Maybe. Gabriel Murphy. We have big plans, for that UDFA. So it's a crowded room, and it's a really good problem to have because this is an offseason where Danielle Hunter left. We suddenly went from anxiety about Danielle Hunter leaving, DJ Wanham to the Panthers, I believe. Everybody's favorite Marcus Davenport is now on tap to start for the Lions. And losing your 3 primary pass rushers really didn't cause much heartburn after you saw what the Vikings produced. So Patrick Jones is certainly in the mix. I could be wrong on this one. I don't think he's going to make the team. I think he's going to be an odd man out, and he'll be waived and signed somewhere else. But I think it's really safe to say he's on the roster bubble. And I think overall it's because he didn't play like gangbusters last year. And when Marcus Davenport was hurt, the team was begging for somebody to step up, and anytime Jones did, it really wasn't too much. Now, there was a game or two in 2022 where he looked really good. I think the Dolphins game comes to mind. So he might have that in his DNA somewhere, but right now I have Patrick Jones II as my number 5 roster bubble guy, which brings us to number 4, and that is James Lynch. The Vikings somewhat quietly have a lot of defensive tackles for the other spot, if you want to call it that, next to Harrison Phillips. But none of the guys are really that great. It's Jerry Tillery, who's probably the front runner to start. Maybe Brian Flores can make something out of his first-round draft stock from, what draft was he, 2019? But at defensive tackle, there's Levi Drake Rodriguez, the rookie, Jonah Williams, Jonathan Bullard, he's a staple, James Lynch, Jalen Redmond from the UFL. There is a lot of candidates to emerge either for roster depth or challenge Jerry Tillery for the starting job. And James Lynch is right in there. He was kind of signed later in the offseason, and he completed his whole rookie contract with the Vikings, but it just doesn't really feel like it because his seasons were usually undone by injury. But the thing to remember on James Lynch is when he plays in the regular season, he's usually pretty good. And therefore, he's kind of like Jalen Naylor, how we feel about Naylor right now. If he can only stay healthy, he can be good. That's how I feel about James Lynch. But you never know with those guys that battle injuries all the damn time if they're trustworthy enough to make the roster and then start. But with Lynch, when he is on the field, you usually don't have a whole lot of complaints. And this is on a team that absolutely needs production from the defensive tackle because they refused to sign a big name like Eric Armstead in free agency, and then during the draft, all of the good ones flew off the board in round 2, it felt like. So James Lynch is right there on the roster bubble, and for me, the definition of this is I wouldn't be surprised one iota if he's the starter week 1. I wouldn't be surprised one iota if he's cut on, is it August 27th or whatever it is. So James Lynch on the roster bubble, a longtime Viking, believe it or not. He's back to compete. Number 3, similar to Patrick Jones because they play the same position, is Andre Carter II. At this time last year, we were pounding the table for 2 guys that were UDFAs, Ivan Pace Jr. and Andre Carter II. Well, Ivan Pace Jr. busted out and did the thing. Everybody was right about him, including Harrison Smith, who said, I think last June, like, somebody asked Harrison Smith, who's one guy we should be watching for at Vikings training camp? And Harrison Smith was like, Ivan Pace, that guy's the real deal. Anytime you hear somebody like Harrison Smith endorse somebody, then you know it's the real deal. Lo and behold, it didn't take long for Ivan Pace to do the thing, and he became an immediate starter, and then bada bing, a year later, it looks like he's going to be, wearing the green dot. But on Andre Carter, it didn't quite come with that fanfare. He played a little bit at times. We had the high hopes for him because he was supposed to be another steal, UDFA steal, a quasi special. But the thing is, you can't usually give up on young players this soon. It's just that the Vikings' edge room is suddenly so crowded. And it's a better problem than the defensive tackle room. Let's face it, it's just a bunch of guys. The edge rushing room has a lot of good players. And right on that, they'll probably keep 5 edge rushers, maybe 6. But Carter is right there on that 5 or 6, especially if Gabriel Murphy, who is this year's edition of UDFA, possible breakout. It's all going to be about the training camp performance from Andre Carter and the subsequent preseason games. So he's there on the roster bubble. He joins Patrick Jones, and a lot of this banks on Gabriel Murphy making the team. That might be a controversial take. If he hits the practice squad, he'll probably be swiped by somebody like Luigi Villain in the Panthers last year. But I absolutely believe Carter's on the roster bubble. This one could go either way. Hopefully for his sake, he makes the 53-man roster and becomes a situational pass rusher because every team needs those, and so will the Vikings. Number 2 is at a high-profile position. It is Jaren Hall. All of a sudden, usually in the past decade, the Vikings don't have much quarterback mystery. Thank you, Kirk Cousins, for the consistency. But this time, they certainly do. We're pretty sure Sam Darnold is going to be QB1 against the Giants on September 8th. There's some smoke and enthusiasm that McCarthy will be too good in the next 5-6 weeks that he will score the upset. I would love it. I recommend it. But I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it'll be Darnold. But the other, after Darnold and McCarthy, it also gets fascinating. We just witnessed a season from the 2023 Vikings where quarterback injuries were a big damn deal, and we had an honest-to-goodness quarterback carousel. So that's the whole reason I'm even talking about, QB3 and QB4 spots. Jaren Hall is a fascinating roster bubble candidate because I would normally say he's so young. He's really not. What is he, 26? His career is so young. This is his second year, and a lot of folks have a sour taste in their mouth about him because he played so poorly against the Packers late in the season. But rookie quarterbacks in general need time to blossom, and especially guys that weren't even drafted. The verdict can't be out after one bad start. But if you assume Sam Darnold will win QB1, definitely QB2 if he's not QB1. McCarthy gets in there as QB2. That leaves Nick Mullins and Jaren Hall. And Hall is right on the roster bubble because if he doesn't make the team, I expect him to hit the practice squad. But then would some team steal him, swipe him? They are allowed to do that. So right now, the roster bubble is more about Mullins versus Hall. There is some, like Paul Allen said on his show a few weeks ago, that he expects Nick Mullins and J.J. McCarthy to duke it out for QB2. Maybe. I think McCarthy is safer as the QB2. But after that, it is Hall and Mullins, and the Vikings aren't going to keep 4 quarterbacks on the active roster. If they did, it would be the very unusual by NFL standards, especially with that emergency quarterback, like little release valve that the NFL has allowed. So Jaren Hall versus Nick Mullins puts Hall right on the roster bubble. We already know what Nick Mullins is. It's a very prolific passer, volume passer that, you shouldn't be scared of one bit when it comes to moving the football downfield, but you should be concerned about the recklessness. With Jaren Hall, it's a lot more of a question mark. You can't adjudicate him based on 2 drives against the Atlanta Falcons in the Josh Dobbs game, and then one awful, terribly shitty performance against the Packers. If he, in theory, if he was the Vikings' long-term solution, you would have a lot more patience. But with J.J. McCarthy in the house, who know if Hall is expendable? Another word for expendable is roster bubble. So Pat Jones at number 5. Number 4, James Lynch, a defensive tackle. Number 3, Andre Carter, last year's UDFA crush. Number 2, Jaron Hall. And number 1 is, you guessed it, Lewis Cine. To me, Lewis Cine is the ultimate, the quintessential roster bubble guy on this team for this training camp and preseason. Why? Well, he is a first-round draft pick, number 32 overall in the 2022 NFL Draft. We think he can be good if he gets playing time, but the problem for him, the good problem for the Vikings, is the safety room is already too deep. They don't need any help at safety, let alone Lewis Cine, that it's like, even if Cine scripts a fantastic training camp and then looks like a stud in these 3 preseason games, when will he play? Is what I ask you. Are you going to take away Josh Metellus, Harrison Smith, Cameron Bynum's snaps? I guess the versatility of Brian Flores' offense could move some linebackers around, and then maybe Cine gets a little playing time. But the big problem for Cine and his roster bubble status is it really doesn't matter if he's good, because the Vikings already have safety totally locked down. It's their deepest spot. Nevertheless, this guy is a first-rounder, and you would think, because it's Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's first-rounder, he'd have a vested interest in seeing what the guy can do. That doesn't mean that, they're going to let Cameron Bynum walk after this year, I don't think. Josh Metellus has already shown he ain't going anywhere. And then Harrison Smith has at least one more season left. So Cine, I don't think he will make the roster because that roster spot will be too precious. But the other side of the coin is the Vikings gain absolutely nothing besides a roster spot in waiving Cine at the end of the summer. There is no financial benefit. In fact, you could trade him and get a little bit back, like probably one of those conditional 7th-round picks. But Cine is so fascinating because fresh off of the leg absolute compound fracture, October 2022, it seemed like his recovery went really well. And then last season arrived. We're like, all right, let's see when Cine gets in there. And the only time he ever saw action was on special teams. And then when he played against the Packers in garbage time in that same Jaron Hall game that I mentioned a few moments ago. So it will be supremely intriguing to see what comes of Lewis Cine on the Vikings 53-man roster, on the outside looking in, and then wherever he ends up. His career isn't going to be over. There's some team it'll probably be the Ravens for all of the poetic justice of Kyle Hamilton going to the Ravens when every Vikings fan wanted him. I'm going to guess Cine ends up with the Ravens, so we have to seethe over that. But Lewis Cine, to me, absolutely embodies the 2024 roster bubble, because do you really want to give up on a first-rounder who had a bad injury in his rookie year when you already have safeties that are going to speak for the playing time? We shall see. I don't think Cine will make the roster, but I would love to be pleasantly proven wrong. All right, that's all we got for Friday. Tomorrow night, Brevy Bright Lights, Brevin Bain and I will talk to SK, Sean Kenner. He usually comes on once a month. He's a fantastic guest. We'll start to pick his brain about what he likes and dislikes about training camp. That's all I got for Friday, July 26th. Skol, baby.